my philosophical colleagues who have come from different parts of the country, my dear students, friends and colleagues. At the outset, I am grateful to the ACPR for giving me this nice opportunity of meeting all of you. This soil is a spiritual soil because it is from here we could hear the great sayings of Gurudev Ranade. In the inaugural address, our Honorable Vice Chancellor has said that this place should have philosophy. And he has also suggested that we should have a MOU with the Indian Philosophical Congress and this university so that philosophy could be introduced. Sir, I assure you that with the cooperation of my colleagues who are here, philosophy professors, we definitely will make an effort in this direction, and very soon a course on philosophy would be introduced in your university. We'll make effort in this direction. In fact, the Indian Philosophical Congress, I should tell, that in the last Congress, which was a centenary year, which was celebrated in IIT Mumbai, we had a special session on Gurudev Ranade's philosophy. That was the first time in Indian Philosophical Congress a parallel session was introduced because of the effort taken by our advocate Ziralizar, who contacted me, and he was very keen that during this centenary year we should have a parallel session on the contributions of Gurudev. And also I must say a few words about this seminar. When this seminar was mooted by Zirali sir and then by Subramania Bhatt, we thought that we should have a serious seminar. So from the beginning, we have been planning to organize it in a grand way by inviting scholars who have really contributed to philosophical discourse. So that's why you can see the galaxy of philosophers who have contributed substantially. And also, you would have seen the brochure which we have prepared, wherein we accommodated different dimensions of Gurudev. Especially we have introduced his main concept, namely rational mysticism, which is something very unique and which is very, very interesting, which I shall be discussing with you now. And also, we have introduced concepts like tradition and modernity. And also, where do we situate Ranade's philosophy in the 20th century? These are some of the themes, sub-themes, which we thought we should include in the brochure. So, because of the efforts taken by Zarali and others, we are able to meet here. And this seminar, I am sure, it is planned in a very beautiful way. And the scholars have taken different dimensions. I have gone through all the papers as well as the abstracts in advance, and all of them have given a proper methodological understanding of Gurudev. And in fact, we are very, very stubborn in not allowing papers or abstracts which do not say anything about Ranade. We wrote to them saying that this does not speak about the contribution of Gurudev, so you write on him, otherwise please don't come. So we want to have a very, very neat seminar in the sense that we have to talk about the contributions made by Gurudev so that youngsters especially and young philosophers, young teachers, they can also understand the contribution made by Gurudev. Now this center is something very unique and special, I should tell, because ACPR, the Academy of Comparative Philosophy and Religion, this is something very important. In comparative philosophy, the term comparative philosophy, though it is in vogue in philosophy, it was popularized, I would say, by Gurudev Ranade. Because in the 20th century, there are scholars who talk about comparative philosophy. Comparative philosophy, which is otherwise known as intercultural philosophy, is very much familiar in the 20th century, wherein we make comparison of the Indian and Western. We also talk about Chinese philosophy and Indian philosophy, African philosophy, Japanese philosophy, wherein we try to show some parallels between Indian and Western. In fact, in modern day, we come across thinkers like B.K. Matilal, J.N. Mohanty, P.T. Raju, and then Radhakrishnan. These are some of the scholars who have contributed substantially for comparative philosophy. But what is interesting is, in 1940s, Gurudev Ranade has introduced this concept in a novel way, so that in many of his writings you can see the culmination of both Indian and Western. That is the reason why he has named this center as Academy of Comparative Philosophy and Religion. So this center has a lot of contributions for the development of philosophy, especially in the area of mysticism and the Upanishadic philosophy. And I have noted down some of the important points which I would like to place before you. In the contemporary philosophical discourse, I come across two important books. One edited by Nalini Bhushan, who has written extensively on Ranade. And also Professor Kovard, in his edited work, wherein we find the article, lengthy article written by J.G. Arapura, a Canadian philosopher. Both of these contain the lengthy discourse on Ranade's philosophy. Friends, I must tell you here that Gurudev Ranade is a neglected philosopher in India. In fact, when I was telling somebody in Chennai that I am going for a seminar on Ranade, he was asking, who is Ranade? So unfortunately, the contribution of Ranade has not reached the young philosophers. We are talking about modern philosophers. That's fine. But Ranade was the pioneer in this movement. He was the first one, I should say, to talk about the comparative philosophy, wherein he could see the synthesis between Indian and Western. And while talking about the significance of comparative philosophy, he makes this statement. He says that a correlation between Indian and Western is very much essential, and also it is the need of the hour. He says that philosophy, if at all it has to improve or develop, then it should talk about the synthesis between Indian and Western. So this he writes in 1940s, you can imagine. One of his close associates is B.R. Kulkarni. He was one who stayed with him for a very long time. He was his disciple to some extent, I can say, if I'm right? He talks about how Ranade has a special approach towards the conception of God. Of course, all philosophers, if he is a metaphysical philosopher, he would talk about God, no doubt. But Kulkarni ji says that our Gurudev as a concern, or his the nucleus of his philosophy is God realization. In fact, he says God realization or understanding the notion of God is the elan vital. This is a term used by all of us know Henry Bergson. He says it is elan vital of Gurudev, that is speaking about God. And also in Ranade's philosophy, friends, there are different dimensions. You can see the metaphysical aspect, you can see the epistemological aspect, ethical aspect, and religious aspect. But all these aspects converge in one point, that is God realization. So God realization, he says, is not an event, but a process. And he says, it is by a progressive process you can understand God realization. It is not something static, or it is not something which comes immediately. By progression you can understand the significance also of God. And also another contribution of Gurudev is, he talks about what is known as the doctrine of approximation. That is, he says, stage by stage, by procedure, you can understand, you can come approximate to God. This also is a unique contribution. So the perpetual progress is something which is remarkable in the writings of Gurudev, which I don't find in any of the contemporary philosophers' approach. And he has written one beautiful article. Of course, many articles are there. One article I would like to quote, because this article has a special significance. Philosophy of the Spirit is the title of the article. And this was the presidential address, right, of the 13th session of Indian Philosophical Congress, held in the year 1937, December, in Nagpur, wherein he shows how the contemporary discoveries which we find in modern science could be adopted or could be seen or is visible in Indian philosophical tradition. In fact, he has developed a very beautiful concept in this article, very remarkable article. He has coined a word, new word which is coined is spiriton. We heard the word spirit, but he has developed the concept spiriton. This word actually is somewhat similar to Saint Jnaneshwar understanding. Something which is similar to that he has developed spiriton. And he says how, whether it is neurology or physics or chemistry, all these could be seen in the philosophy of spirit. So this is a very remarkable philosophical understanding which he has developed. And also, friends, I should tell you that this is a phrase which is very fascinating. When I read this, I was reminded of our government, how our government is a spiritualistic government. He says in one place, our politics cannot succeed without a spiritual basis. This is a very remarkable statement, and I feel that this statement has a special significance at the present juncture. Because now the government has to be, must have a spiritual basis. This is something very remarkable in his ideas. And also, he says, non-violence as well as truth are the flowers which has come from the root, namely the spirit. This is also a very beautiful concept. And also, he talks of the universal brotherhood, which he says is possible through the understanding of the other. Friends, in the 20th century or in the 21st century, we are talking about the notion of other. Because in the Western philosophical discourse, the concept of other is very important. But long back in 1940s, our Gurudev has spoken about the concept of the other, and he said how the other could be incorporated into myself. This is also a remarkable approach which he has made. And also, in his philosophical discourse, as I said in the beginning, you can see the synthesis of philosophy and religion. And he says, the uniqueness of Indian philosophy. What is the uniqueness of Indian philosophy? He says, it is not only philosophy, but also religion. He says, Indian philosophy contains both philosophy and religion. And he says, the relation between philosophy and religion is somewhat like this. It is the relation between form and matter. One cannot exist without the other. And also, he says that both can help each other, in the sense that philosophy can help religion and religion also can be helped by philosophy. This is also very unique, and in this way, he could answer some of the Westerners' criticism, because most of the time, Westerners criticize Indian philosophy by saying it is only religion. It has nothing to do with philosophy. But here is a thinker who could show the need for synthesizing both philosophy and religion. This also, I would say, is a unique contribution of Gurudev. And also, I feel that this philosophy, I would just put it in one line. It is a philosophy of reconciliation. This concept of reconciliation is very important because he could reconcile both Indian and Western. Friends, I would like to show how he could compare Shankara with Bradley, for example. All this approach now we see in our Western and Indian literature, but long back it is Gurudev who has shown the link between philosophy and religion, and also in this reconstruction of philosophy, he could reconciliation of philosophy, he could combine both philosophy, both Indian and Western philosophical tradition. And also he said that there should be a synthesis between tradition and modernity. For this reason only we could, in the sub-theme, you can see the tradition and modernity in Ranade's philosophy, because he's the one who has synthesized both tradition. He has got a very high regard for the tradition. And also, all of us know how to distinguish between tradition and orthodoxy. In orthodoxy, there is something which is very rigid. You can't make change in the orthodoxy. But tradition, there is always a change. Tradition allows you to make certain amendments or changes. So this he has anticipated perhaps long back in his writing. That is the reason why we call him as a philosopher who could synthesize both tradition and modernity. And also he is a mystic. This is really remarkable. And of course we come across many mystical thinkers. There are many who wrote on mysticism. For example, we come across Radhakrishnan, who wrote extensively on religious experience as well as mystical experience, and in Radhakrishnan's writings you can see the distinction between mystical experience and religious experience. In Western tradition we come across thinkers like Evelyn Underhill and William James, who wrote on mystical experience, religious experience, and he has of course criticized the methodology which are used in religious experience. So there are scholars, both Indian and Western, who wrote on mystical experience. But what is unique in our Gurudev is that he has developed a very beautiful concept called rational mysticism. This is really remarkable. I was astonished when I read the term first time, rational mysticism. Because I was asking myself this question, can mysticism be rational? Right? Because mysticism, always we say we have been taught like this. Mysticism, we come out with certain characteristics of mysticism. We say it is experience, subjective experience. It is something which cannot be revealed to others. It is one's own experience which cannot be written by words or language. All that is a notion which we receive from our teachers. But here is a thinker who talks about what is known as rational mysticism. What is this rational mysticism? Can there be reason in that? He says reason also plays a dominant role in mysticism, but at the same time is very specific in saying that the rationality has its own limitation. He says this is an intuitive experience. This is what anubhava, inner anubhava. I'll quote some of his beautiful phrases just now. And he says, in his writing you can see how one can synthesize Spinoza with Shankara, Kant with Bhagavad Gita. Normally this is a very familiar topic which is discussed in Indian and Western philosophical discussion, that is Kant and Bhagavad Gita. We are very much familiar with that. But we come across a thinker who talks about Spinoza and Shankara, Bradley and Shankara, and also he talks about Ramanuja and other thinkers of the West, St. Bonaventure and others. So he is the one who first could establish a link between Indian and Western. And I would like to quote his statement here. In 1912, in the journal Modern Review, published in the September issue 1912, he says as follows: It is only when our philosophy is exhibited in modern garb that the world will come to know the worth of Indian philosophy. If at all Indian philosophy, the significance of Indian philosophy should be known to the West, then we should be in a position to incorporate, or we should understand the Western philosophical discourse. In fact, in the 20th century, there are scholars, thinkers like Jain Mohanty, for example. He said, this is a high time that both Indian and Western philosophers have a dialogue. This is what we need now, because we cannot have any exclusive philosophy. It is a need of the hour to have a dialogue with the West, and West also, this is very important, the West also should have a dialogue with the Indian philosophy or Eastern philosophy. This is which need of the hour. But you can imagine, in the year 1912, Gurudev writes like this. And also, he had some vision, the mystical vision which I just now pointed out. He had the prophetic vision in the year 1940 and 1942. 2 times he had the mystical vision. We calls it as a prophetic vision. And also, cosmic, can I take another 5 minutes? Can I do a time? Because there are other speakers, I don't want to intrude into their time. So, while talking about mystical experience, he said he had the prophetic vision twice, in the year 1940 and 1942. And then he also talks about his cosmic vision he had. He says he had a sublime vision of cosmic regeneration. This is how he represents that his mystical vision, that which he calls cosmic vision. Then also he talks about ecstatic vision, otherwise blissfulness, which he had in the year 1944 on 17th April. He says these 3 visions, from these 3 visions, one can understand the special significance of the mysticism. So he was in a state of God intoxication. This is a term used by Professor Kulkarni. He said he had the state of God intoxication. This is something very beautiful phrase. And he says there is a complete assimilation of bliss. Then you merge with God entirely. This is, I always consider this with the Advaitic vision, where the individual self is lost and the individual self merges with that of the Supreme. So this is something really remarkable. And also, some of his books I would like to mention. I'll just take few minutes and then stop. His well-known book is, all of us know, wherein he talked about the philosophy of the Upanishads. I would consider him as a great acharya like Shankara, Ramanuja and Madhva. These are the great acharyas all of us know, who gave 3 kinds of interpretation for the Prasthanatrayas. And of course, Radhakrishna also could be, Dr. S. Radhakrishna also could be considered as an acharya, because he also wrote commentaries on Brahma Sutra, Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita. But what is significant in Ranade is, he also wrote commentaries or exposition, I would say exposition of the Prasthanatraya. For example, the philosophy of the Upanishads, he has had a detailed discussion, he has written on Upanishads. And also, his second very interesting book is the Bhagavad Gita as the philosophy of God realization. So, Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita, and also another very interesting book, Vedanta as the culmination of Indian thought. So, in all these 3 books, you can see how he has dealt with the Prasthanatraya, the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita and the Brahma Sutras. But what is interesting is that in these 3 expositions, he has given a different dimension. In all these 3 books, you can see how you can compare, or he sees a comparative methodology which could be attempted in both Indian and Western tradition. This is he's an acharya who is of a different mode of understanding. He is not fully following either Shankara, Ramanuja, because he has got a very high regard for both Shankara and Ramanuja and Madhva. So he developed his own methodology for understanding the Prasthanatraya. And he says his philosophical discourse can be summed up in one short sentence. He says that Vedanta is a synthesis of both idealistic and spiritualistic philosophy. This is his greatest contribution. And also, one can see how his approach towards Marathi saints, he wrote extensively on Marathi saints, wherein he could see how the Marathi saints have given a new methodology for understanding mysticism. And also, he wrote on Hindi and Canadian Kannadiga saints, wherein he also shows the methodology which is needed for mystical experience. So let me just take 2 minutes and then conclude. He has talked about rational mysticism. With that I'll conclude. What is the uniqueness of this rational mysticism? He says rational mysticism is not a contradiction but a truism, because normally when we say reason and faith, they will not go together. So people would say that is a contradiction in terms. But our Gurudev says that rational mysticism is not a contradiction but a truism. And one can see how in his well-known book, The Philosophy of the Upanishads, there is mysticism which he has elaborated in a beautiful way so that each and every individual can understand the significance of mysticism. And also he says the rational mysticism is a critique of intuition. Now, just now I said that it is intuitive experience. I said it is anubhava, one's own anubhava. But at the same time, he also evaluates, this is very important, he evaluates the significance of the intuitive experience, and he says that both reason and intuition are necessary, or both are necessary tools for understanding the mysticism. And also he says, I am quoting him, follow the original independent text with the proper interpretation. This also, this statement may look very, very simple, but it has a lot of implication. When he says go to the originals and see the proper interpretation, because sometimes we try to interpret the scripture in a wrong way. That creates a problem. And because that is the reason why, hermeneutics is a new methodology in philosophy. I am telling this for the sake of non-philosophy students here. That is interpretation. That hermeneutics means interpretation. So he says, go to the originals, read the originals and try to see the original interpretation or give the original interpretation, which can accommodate the text. This is very important. Because when I am interpreting, for example, Advaita Siddhi, I cannot give a Vishishtadvaidik interpretation. So the text has to be seen in the particular context only. And this has been anticipated by Gurudev long back by saying that the original independent text has to be seen in the way in which tradition has given a space for us. Because tradition allows interpretation, but it has to be within the rules and regulations. That is the reason it is said that if we violate that, then we are doing what is known as a hermeneutic violence to the text. For want of time, I am not entering into that. So mysticism, he says, is a culmination of the Upanishadic philosophy. He says, Upanishadic philosophy is the highest philosophy which talks about not only mysticism, but it gives, it explains the inner core of Indian spirits. So with this, I would like to conclude by saying that this mystical experience has got a special place in the methodology of Indian as well as Western philosophical schools. Many of the Western scholars think that rational mysticism has got certain criticisms, but at the same time, one cannot neglect, one cannot simply say it is one's own anubhava. One cannot simply say that there is no reason in it. That's the reason why Gurudev has talked about rational mysticism, the reason which can be seen in rational mysticism. So also, one more point, I'll stop. He was basically trained by Allahabad University. From Allahabad, we have got 3 colleagues who have come to attend the seminar. Allahabad is a very nice place, and it is from this place he has developed his philosophical ideas. In fact, he wrote The Evolution of My Thought, which is like autobiography, wherein he explains the significance of Allahabad University and how his ideas have progressed. And he says in one place, I am much indebted to the opportunities which I have had at the Allahabad University to widen my philosophical horizon during the last few years of my stay there. These years have opened out a new intellectual vista before me, enabling me to define more accurately to myself my own position in philosophy from the side of contemporary developments in metaphysics, ethics, psychology, and religion. One more point I want to take. That is, though in philosophy we talk about metaphysics, because when Gurudev talks about God, man, and world, one can claim that he is a metaphysical thinker. Of course, he is a metaphysical thinker, but in his writings, epistemology plays a very important role. In fact, he argues that epistemologically also, we can prove the existence of God. This is something very interesting, and is a well-known book which was published in 1926, a century ago, a constructive survey of Panneerselvam philosophy, wherein he talks about the epistemological significance of self-consciousness. Our Vice Chancellor has been talking about this consciousness, self-consciousness, and he says epistemologically also one can prove the existence of self-consciousness. So I have got a lot of things to say, but for want of time I close, and I would like to say, this is my last word, and he approaches the notion of ultimate reality from three standpoints: the cosmological standpoint, theological standpoint, and psychological standpoint. Normally, philosophers approach the problem both from the cosmological as well as theological. But here is a thinker who could give a psychological approach also towards philosophical concepts, and while discussing his discourse on self-realization or self-knowledge is something really remarkable, and it has got a lot of implication to the present day world. And when we are talking about phenomenology and other discourses, one can think of his way of approaching the concept of Turiya. He examines Mandukya Upanishads, for example, especially analyzes Gaudapada's Karika, and shows how Turiya has got the application of what is known as pure consciousness. And many modern scholars like Jayan Mohanty, Professor R. Balasubramanian and others, they are trying to show how this Turiya or this pure consciousness transcends the phenomenology of the West. And long back this has been anticipated by our Gurudev. So with this, I would like to close, and I thank you very much for giving me this nice opportunity of sharing some of my views with you. Thank you.